scan my screen. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order and start with a roll call.
Bensonville,
Here.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Here.
Des Plaines.
Here.
Oh, good. Sorry about that, Alderman.
Okay.
Elmhurst,
Here.
Harwood Heights.
Here.
Thank you. Niles,
Here.
Park Ridge,
Here.
River Grove,
Here.
Schaumburg,
Here.
Schiller Park,
Here.
and Wooddale.
Here.
Okay, we're all here. We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Next on the agenda is the approval of the October 28th Fly Quiet Committee meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
I'll move so.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Who was that?
I said that.
Joe. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll do another roll call.
Bensonville,
Yes.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes. Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Hey, if I can just ask everyone we're getting some feedback, so can everyone mute themselves if they're not speaking? And then we are moving on to ONCC member comments. So this is a time for any ONCC members who are not part of the Fly Quiet Committee to provide their comments on our discussion for today.
Karen,
Yep.
if you don't mind, I'd like to share an observation. And it's not, I'm not admonishing anything or anyone or anybody, but I'd just like to share the observation. It seems like, I think Joe brought up something a few months back about parochialism. And I think it's really starting to show, because it's coming to the end of choosing the runway configurations and everything. And we have the southeast corner of the runway saying, no, I don't want to see planes. The southwest corner of the airport, I'm sorry. Southwest corner saying, well, I want all the planes to take off on the short runways going northeast. Then we get to Mount Prospect, and there's nothing going over Mount Prospect for some reason. And that's leaving only the northeast corner of the airport and the northeast side of the airport that's getting a lot of attention. So I'd like everybody to just, everybody here deserves quiet and should get some quiet, but nobody should be, the noise shouldn't be focused on any one area. And that's all. I'd just like to share that. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
I'll
Okay.
mute.
It doesn't look
I
like we
agree
have-
with that. You need to rotate these runways. This needs to be, we need
Ma'am,
better rotation.
Are you an ONCC member? This is only a time for ONCC members to speak. We have a public comment section at the end of the meeting where you can
Okay,
speak.
all right, I'll hold back.
Don't ask me all the way under.
Okay, let's move on. So we are back to review of alternative H. We're making good progress. So I will hand it over to Ryan. You're muted, Ryan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Yes, we are again resuming where we left off last time with our review and refinement of alternative H. Just to remind everyone where we're at in the process, we're continuing to review and revise the alternatives that have advanced for consideration by this committee, alternatives B and H, and we are currently focusing on alternative H. We are today continuing with the primary headings. I realize the agenda does say primary configurations, but we did finish that with alternative H, and we've moved on to primary headings, and we've made some good progress moving through all the departure runways and specific headings for those runways. And last time we left off with runway 27 left departure headings. And so that's where we're going to be resuming today. And here's where we're at, where we've left off with alternative H. This incorporates all of the modifications that have been approved to date, which includes the vector headings with turns on the crosswind runways 22 left and 4 left, as well as the modifications to some of our parallel runways 9 right and 28 right. But we are moving on with runway 27 left. And so runway 27 left, currently in alternative H, has a designated vector heading of 280 degrees, a single vector heading. And so what that means is when 27 left is used in a configuration in the schedule in weeks 2 and 10, departures will turn to heading of 280 degrees until they reach 3,000 feet. This is a bit different than some of the other runways currently, as they have 2 vector headings, whereas each vector heading would be used in each week in the schedule. And so this is the single vector heading that's currently approved. Now, since our last meeting, we have received 3 recommendations for changes for the primary heading for this runway, and we can walk through those now. Madam Chair, would you like me to walk through each one of all 3, or would you like me to do one at a time and have a discussion on each one at a time?
No, I'd like you to walk through all 3 so that everyone knows kind of the discussion that's occurred between our last meeting and today.
Okay. So so like our last meeting, we're going to use a bit of a side-by-side comparison. So on the left, you have what's currently approved for alternative H, the 280 degree heading. On the right in green is our first request, which is a heading of 275 degrees, a single heading to be used in weeks 2 and 10. The 275 degree heading was chosen to best utilize the corridor of 390 there with some compatible land use. This again would be a single vector heading. The next request that we received was for not only the 275 degree heading, but to incorporate a second heading of 285 degrees. And so in this iteration, 275 degrees would be used in week 2 and 285 degrees would be used in week 10. And then the third request we received was for a heading of 295 degrees, a single heading. So a single vector heading of 295 degrees in weeks 2 and week 10. So those are the 3 recommendations that we've received from the committee and the advisory members to date. And so that's what's up for consideration with this committee now.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So we are going to change order once again, and I'm going, oh, Evan, do you have a procedural question?
Yeah, can we just clarify who requested those changes? I saw the SOC letter, but I didn't see any other requests come through.
Yeah, we'll get to that. That's actually what I was going to say is I'm going to give the 3 people / groups an opportunity who submitted an opportunity to speak first this time so that they can provide the background of their requested changes and everyone can consider that. And then we'll go back through the remaining members in our standard procedures. So Schaumburg is first. This is a carryover from a previous discussion. We are recommending the 275 single departure heading for a couple of reasons. Ryan mentioned it's compatible with Illinois 390, which matches what we've done for the crosswind runways. We also went into this kind of with the understanding that H was advanced based on a proposal to have only a single departure heading for the east-west runways. And so that's something that We think contrasts with alternative B and provided kind of a greater variety of options as opposed to just duplicating the alternative B runway headings. And so that's why you see this recommendation coming from the Village of Schaumburg today. So next was SOC's recommendation. So I will hand that over to Cynthia to provide her background.
Okay, great. Thank you, Karen. So our recommendation is two headings, a 275 and a 285 heading configuration. And mainly to Karen's point that it was advanced with just one heading that is accurate. SOC has always though recommended two headings in that scenario, and mainly just to vary the populations that are impacted there. We did shift down to a 275 heading consistent with Schaumburg's recommendation in the last meeting. As we hadn't actually looked at 275, we had looked at 285. So we ran the numbers on that and can agree with Karen that it is a compatible land use corridor. Sorry, not Karen, but Schaumburg. And that we can support that. The second heading then would be a 285 to provide 10 degrees difference between those two headings and provide some degree of relief. I will say that the most impacted communities here, there was a consensus really on balancing the benefit of shifting off that arrival path for the arrival folks that are being impacted there, and achieving two headings that can best use compatible land use. As we get into a 295 heading, we are not really gaining anything. We're impacting more people, and the decrease in overlap over the arrival stream is not worth the increase of impacted population, especially that will be at a higher decibel level because of the aircraft turn effect on the noise decibel level on the ground. So we came to a consensus with all of our SOC communities to balance the impacts over SOC with two headings at 275 and 285.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Dan.
Thank you. I guess I just want to start with a recap of some of the key considerations in this quadrant. The dotted line there shows 9C arrivals. What you also have to consider is the long runway usage in the crosswind weeks. So there's another actually 4 weeks, 1,600 feet south on 9 right. And in this alternative H schedule, all 4 of those weeks are consecutive to the weeks on 9C. So this is a significantly arrival weighted quadrant in that there are 6 weeks as opposed to 2 weeks as departures that are spaced 8 weeks apart without any risk of consecutive impacts. In this case, the consecutive impacts for departures occur in the southwest quadrant, which has all the long runway requests in West Flow. So I think you really need to look at the whole picture and not a single iteration of a departure heading rotated through 5-degree increments. You have to consider how many times residents are impacted in the schedule and the volume of aircraft. It's been this committee's understanding that arrivals are typically 2/3 of the operations. So while I understand the intent here, when you see a gray corridor, it's important to note no residential area is compatible land use. And what we're showing here are departure tracks, not noise dispersion. And that really isn't a linear function. If you are to take a noise contour of a single aircraft, rotate it through these headings, that's not an accurate impact and really doesn't represent the lived experience on the ground. And I guess we'd made a request prior. Is there any way Ryan could pull up that slide on dispersion just so people understand what influenced our recommendation?
Yeah, Dan, and let me, before you speak to it, let me just do a little explanation here. So this is a slide that we had shown in a previous meeting, showing actual flight tracks for the existing preferential flight paths. So on the left, you have the 10 left preferential flight path, which is a runway heading straight out. And in pink there, those lines are actual flight tracks from 2020. Each track ends at where the aircraft reached 3,000 feet. And so you get an idea of what the dispersion is like for a existing runway heading preferential flight path. And then on the right, you have the existing 28 right preferential departure procedure, which is that turn to 290 degrees. And again, actual tracks from 2020 showing that kind of dispersion you get with a turn.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for putting in those preferential flight tracks. I was going to have to implore the committee to use their imagination. So what I'd like to take note here, first, obviously, this is the south airfield. So for this argument, you would move that about a mile north into the northwest quadrant. And what I'd like to draw the committee's attention to is notice the distribution is asymmetrical to that flight track. And in fact, with a 20-degree departure heading, your concentration is actually closer to 10 to 15. And the reason is, I understand that, and Ryan can correct me here, when you have a heading change at the end of the runway, unless that aircraft completes its turn before the end of the runway, you're typically going to be south of that heading. Now, they will achieve that heading eventually and be parallel to it, but that's part of what causes our dispersion. So what I fear what we're inadvertently doing with two headings, and I'll get into the lesser headings after we go back to the other slide, is creating a point of concentration, because 5 and 10 degree will obviously result in less dispersion. You can see a 0 degree on the left half of that. So if you consider what a 20-degree heading looks like, and keeping in mind, this only shows to 3,000 feet. And there are some flight tracks, those purple ones that go well out of that central cone are deviations that ideally would be avoided, but they are representative of where turns would occur. So those turns through Wooddale, Elk Grove Village, Itasca, those will occur whether you do a 5, 10, 15, or 25. And that increases the dispersion even further. So can we go back to the original slide that shows the 295? So whether it's a 295 or a 290, we could argue about 5 degrees, but part of the concept here is to avoid adjacent quadrant impact as well as the overlap with the arrivals. And we think a single heading that considers all the factors, not just a single departure track, but the points at which aircraft start to turn, would be the most equitable solution. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, now that you've had an opportunity to hear from the 3 committee members who submitted options for consideration, we're going to run down the list. We'll go through it a second time as we always do. So Bensonville, you're up first.
I have a remedial question. For the when we're doing rotations with the 422s and we have the designated long runways, what are the headings off the designated long, specifically for 27 left?
For alternative H, we've not had that discussion yet.
Will we have that discussion?
It is on the agenda.
Interesting concept, considering that this is a chicken and egg question for me.
My recollection is for alternative B, we did the 10-degree headings.
Yes, so alternative B, we reused the vector headings that we had on the approved for the parallels, but the 10-degree offset center lines.
All right. I mean, obviously, I will SOC's recommendation. Bensville's a member of SOC. We have that, but I do think that Dan makes a compelling argument. So I'm intrigued to hear what the other members have to say.
Okay, thank you. Wooddale?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I will go with the SOC recommendation. I think we should have two headings. Instead of, we're doing two headings on every other runway. We should be consistent, then everybody should share in the noise. That's that simple.
Okay, thank you. Displays.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this. Not actually very sure. I guess what I'm thinking is that this doesn't affect this plane, so I want to do what's the best interest of the communities out to the west, and I'm not getting a clear picture as to how those communities are viewing this. I think that Schaumburg has expressed its opinion, but I don't know about the rest of the communities, and that's what I'd like to know on the different variety before I would decide how I'd vote. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Elmhurst.
Yes, thanks. It was good to hear from the impacted communities. I think at this point, Elmhurst, we generally prefer the one departure heading just for simplicity. Again, I'm repeating myself, and to try to get the departures off of that arrival pattern more so, but I can support what SOC and Wooddale had indicated with the two departure headings, moving some of that north to get off that arrival path and spread out the departures with two takeoff trajectories. So we're leaning towards that. Thanks.
Thank you. Park Ridge.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. I will concur with previous comments. I think if we're going to stick with the criteria, and the criteria is that we have two departure headings, I think we really need to stick with that. Otherwise, I think it opens us up for other questioning as to our methodology. As to the exact flight departure tracks, I'll leave that decision up to the communities impacted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. River Grove.
Doesn't make much difference for River Grove. The only trouble is any of those takeoffs from those runways. It seems anything that's going to go eastbound, they go up, they make their turn, and they come around and go right down my street. So I'm gonna get noise no matter what at night. So I kind of concur with what Cynthia said. I kind of like the outline she provided us, but.
Okay, thank you. Niles. Joe, I think you're muted.
Oh, good. You heard, I already said my speech, so you don't have to hear it again. Niles, because Niles isn't affected by this, there's only two things I need to say. That the two headings seem to make sense to Niles. And frankly, we're going to defer our vote until we see what those impacted communities have a consensus on. And then we'll make our final decision, because we don't live there, so we don't know. It's nice to look at this theoretically, but those people who actually live there understand much better in terms of real life what this means.
Okay.
And that's all I have to say about that.
All right, Schiller Park.
On this question, we would like to defer to the impacted communities.
Okay, thank you. Ward 39.
Yes, excuse me, likewise. But to echo Bensonville's comment, I do find what Dan said quite compelling. But again, for consistency, the two runway headings make sense. And again, we're not living in that area. I'd have to defer to those areas. But again, wait till there's a consensus by the impacted communities before I make my final decision.
Okay, thank you. Harwood Heights.
Hi, thank you. Looking at the headings, the 295 appears to be a little bit too far north and competing with the other arrivals and flights. So I would get off of that. I do agree with the SOC, the 275 and 285 to have two runways. I think we need to not impact one specific communities with one heading. So I would go with the two headings on this and agree with Wooddale. There's a lot of communities affected by these. And certainly I will go with their recommendation, but it seems like they're going with the 275, 285, and I'm with that.
Okay, thank you. Ron?
Yeah, a couple of things just to think about. And I guess question one for you, Schomburg, the 275 you came up with, I'm curious as to why that versus a straight out 270, because 9 Center is the arrival runway. And if you do a 275, if you look at it on the map you're showing here, the 275 basically goes right over the arrival corridor. So if that's a concern, it seems like a straight out 270 departure would equally hit compatible land use, but not fly over the arrival corridor for 9 Center. And then I agree with using two different departure headings. I guess the question I have is why couldn't you use a 275 and a 295? I think 275 and 285 are pretty close together. And then Dan brought up a good point. When you get into the turns, a lot of it may be south of where that heading is supposed to be. So if it's supposed to be a 285, you're likely going to have people down at 275, 280, and then parallel in 285 once they get there. So I don't see why you couldn't do two headings, but do a 275 and 295. And as I mentioned in the last meeting, I think the further north you can get, the better, because you have that huge Bussy Woods area, which is just nothing but open land use, and that's the ideal corridor to use. And we know that the majority of aircraft could easily make a 295 a heading. If you watch flight track when the airport is in a west flow, all day long, every aircraft is turning at a 90-degree heading on departure, and it's all happening over that industrial area that's just off of the runway. So, I mean, aircraft can easily make that turn. And you want the turn to happen over the industrial area. So I think that would work, but it's just some things to think about, the 270 versus 275. And if you're going to have two headings, it doesn't have to be a 275, 285. It could be 275, 295, which I think would provide more split between the two and give people greater relief.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Do we have a procedural question from Wooddale, or did you just have a comment?
Yeah, quick comment. So if we went down to 270, like Ron just said, we're pushing more to the south. And I know when we were doing the southern runways, we're trying to keep the south to the south and the north to the north. The more we push it down, the more impact to the south. And 295, I think if we go 295, I think you're going to impact the other two runways to the north. So that's just a comment. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we're going to go back through the rotation. Ron, to answer your question, the 275 was to try and hit the Illinois 390 corridor while being respectful of the arrival path. I realize it's not a huge difference, but I believe Bensonville has said that, you know, any difference is better than no difference. And so, you know, that was kind of the goal there between 270 or 275. We just feel like knowing how the land around Illinois 390 has developed, you know, it is more industrial warehouse type uses, you know, recognizing there is still some residential. You know, that's our recommendation. I will say, if we're going to go with two departure headings, Schomburg would probably prefer the 275 and 295 with the goal of trying to hit, you know, Bussy Woods. You can see Woodfield Mall is in that general vicinity. And so, you know, trying to avoid some our more dense residential areas. So next we are going,
Sorry, did SOC and Fair get skipped in that
No,
first?
you guys got to go first, remember?
Okay, that was part of this round. I wasn't sure if this was a
Yep.
second round.
This is the second round, so you guys are gonna go. So it'll be JDA and then Fair, and then we'll go through everybody else.
Sorry to
So
interrupt.
Nope, you're good. Cynthia, you're up next.
Oops, sorry there. Okay, well, I appreciate all the discussion and the willingness to defer to the impacted communities. And, you know, speaking to the SOC letter, there are 5 of the 7 communities impacted in the table that we show as far as the vector headings that we're evaluating right now. Our SOC communities, and we go to great lengths to get everybody involved in this decision. So we have 9 mayors that come together and consider the impacts to their individual communities and really do take the time to achieve a consensus. So I guess I really want to speak to the process here. And if there are similar processes happening out there on positions that are being represented, I'd like maybe somebody to explain those for the committee to hear, whether these are consensus positions or individual representations that maybe haven't had the same scrutiny and the same visibility at a public official debated and agreed upon position, because we can, you know, really just looking at the 295 heading, it is consistent across our membership that they don't want the excessive heading. And the reason they don't want the excessive heading is because it's nice to look at the dispersion on the map, but you neglect to understand the increased impact to the population at a much higher decibel level. And with these long runways, you know, we're most concerned about the heavy aircraft, because frankly, a lot of the lighter aircraft are going to hit 3,000 feet well before hitting places like Bussy Woods, and they're going to peel off and go towards their destination, which is a good thing because that brings us additional dispersion. The ones that aren't going to peel off are the heavy aircraft, making 20 decibels more in noise on the ground in the middle of the night. Our population counts are based on the decibel level that is known to wake people from sleeping. So our goal is to, yes, you know, we need to share the noise, but we need to be reasonable in sharing the noise and not excessive in the noise that we're putting on the ground over more people when we're really not gaining anything. The intent is to bring relief, and frankly, at a 295 heading, because the increase in dispersion and the increase of footprint on the ground, you're still impacting the people you were impacting at 285. So, and you're impacting them at a higher level. So, you know, there's some pain here that we need to manage, and it is a consistent position of 5 of the 7 communities through public meetings that their preference is a 275 and a 285 heading to best disperse the noise fairly without over impacting people at a heavier decibel level, which frankly, when you study this from an FAA standpoint, that heavier level of noise, higher level of noise at the 295 heading is going to grow that contour in a manner that may not be helpful to winning the FAA's approval of the program.
Okay, Dan?
Thank you. First, I'm going to answer Evan's question so he doesn't die in anticipation. 27L is never used as an alternate long runway, an alternative H. It's not used in year 1. It's not used in year 40. It'll never be used. So the only headings we have to worry about in this northwest quadrant are the 2 that we're talking about. And hence part of the inequity in alternative H is just that each of these quadrants are lopsided, and that this one's weighted arrivals, the southwest is weighted departures, you flip to the other airport and those reverse. So really, again, back to the big picture here, the highest level of impact is when you overlap those arrival corridors and those residents who are taking the majority of the operations. And part of what we struggle with this north-south airfield concept is this inboard departure concept, which was a choice. And that's fine that the committee made that. But you do have to consider you need to cross that 1,600-foot separation. And at 5 degrees, that takes about 3.5 miles. And that's just the departure track. That's not the noise dispersion. And you're already into residential areas in Elk Grove at 2.5 miles. In addition to that, just considering the concept that I think all the committee members agree with, the north to north and south to south. The south airfield, more likely than not, in the prior week has already had their turn at departures. When you take a 275 and consider the proximity, and I would encourage anyone to watch WebTrack on an average night, a good portion of those aircraft turn south. And those are in being very close proximity to the southwest quadrant in communities like Wooddale and Itasca with populations fairly far north. So I agree there are tough decisions to make. Do you impact some fewer people more? Do you impact more people to a lesser extent? Or do you keep these quadrants separated as much as possible from the standpoint of predictability and equity? And you probably, in fact, it's not probably, you can't achieve all of them. But this committee has stressed over and over again the idea of north to north, south to south. And I fear what you do here with a 275 is lose the predictability and equity in west flow departures. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Bensonville?
Oh, man, this doesn't happen often. I'm liking what Dan's saying. So it's just hard for me to ignore that industrial park right there. And if we go historically, we remember that 1533 was there, and a lot of the land use developed under the flight path of 1533 was compatible land use as a result. With that said, I think when I have my cake and eat it too, I think I'll borrow from SOC and as well as from FAIR. And I mean, maybe 275 and 295 are viable options here. I think I would support that.
Thanks, Evan. Wooddale?
I'll stay with SOC still.
Okay. Des Plaines?
275 and 295.
Elmhurst?
Yeah, I would agree. The alternate B rotations versus alternate H, as I mentioned last meeting, the first alternative is 10 degrees off the arrival path, and the second alternative is 25 degrees off the arrival path, and we've been pretty consistent with that. This 275 versus 280, I think in this case we can make an exception. It gets more over the highway, and I would prefer to stick with the 295 as well, just to be consistent with what we've been doing with the other configurations in H, and as well as what we did in B. If it ends up being 285, that's fine as well. But I think 275, 295 is a slight preference for Elmhurst. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Park Ridge?
No further comment.
River Grove?
No further comment.
Niles?
This is a tough one because 275, 295 seem to make sense, except that SOC has already gotten together and said something else. And SOC does represent eight communities for sure. Would it be wrong for me to ask the SOC people why 295 is not what they want? Can I do that one more time? Or am I asking something that nobody wants to hear again? You know, it's
No,
up to you, Chair.
Let's get through everybody else, and then if there are SOC members who would like to articulate why they don't favor 295, we can give them that opportunity.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Schiller Park,
Nothing to add.
Ward 39,
275, 295, sounds good to me.
Harwood Heights,
Yes, I'll defer to the communities to the west of us. I know in Alt B, we approved the 280 and 295. As long as 295 doesn't go too far north to affect any arrivals. But I think Cindy explained something about the 295 that they would end up hearing more noise. I'd like to hear what else she has to say. Other than that, no further comment.
okay. Are there any SOC members, Cynthia, I'll circle back to you, but are there any SOC members who would like to respond to Joe's question about 295?
I just want to clarify, SOC, I mean, we make recommendations to each other. We have these conversations. It doesn't necessarily mean that SOC speaks for the individual communities.
I understand that, but that just makes, okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, Cynthia, did you want to say anything else?
Sure. So the 295 heading versus the 285 and the 275, when we get into these aggressive headings of 25 degrees, what happens to and the footprint of dispersion is part of that. As that dispersion grows on that flight track, it's the heavy aircraft that also have a big impact on that because their agility is much less in their ability to turn. So they're having a harder time getting to that more aggressive heading as they come off that runway because they're very heavy aircraft, you know, up to the weight of 17 semi trucks in one fully loaded 747-800. So these are not, you know, easily moved objects. They're heavy mass with a lot of difficulty making that turn relative to a lighter aircraft, which can easily make that turn. So in doing that, thrust, et cetera, is increased, which it is what is causing the higher decibel level impact on the ground during those turns. And because the long runways are supporting the heavy aircraft and fully loaded, it becomes an impact. So we really did want to look at the impact of population. And I think what the communities to the south need to understand is that when we get into the 290, 295 headings, that increase in dispersion is somewhat violating the north to the north and the south to the south concept, because Bensonville, Itasca, and Wooddale are all getting impacts south of the arrival stream at a 295 heading on populations that really should be getting relief that week. So you don't know that by this aerial that you see on the map because it's not representing the actual impact of the contour envelope on the ground, but that's what people are going to hear. And that's the danger as we look at these headings on a map with this simple configuration of this arrow, is it's really not representing the people impacted. Bensonville, for example, has an additional, at 285, they have 3,600 people impacted if you look at the blue table in our letter, whereas at 295, they have an additional 4,385 people impacted. Itasca actually decreases at that because they're a little further out, but Wooddale also has an increase at that 295 heading versus the 185 heading or the 285 heading. These are the communities we're trying to bring relief. So this is
Cynthia,
where.
Cynthia, can I interject? Can you explain to me how a with airplanes turning further north, Bensenville gets more impact when I don't have any residents that live north of 27 left.
You don't have, you're getting, that's where I'm saying the contour is spilling over into the south, because these aircraft are turning at a low elevation and that noise has to go somewhere, and it spreads, you know, the contour dramatically. We've provided several charts to SOC on this, representing this visually, and I'd be happy to share that with you, Evan. But the contour grows by 57% of the heavy fleet versus the light fleet. So, you know, when you turn that heavy fleet and that contour spills over to the south. So at a 295 heading, your spillover to the south, your North Bensenville residents, even though they're well south of the runway, are being impacted. And that's an impact that is not visible on these charts, but it will be heard. And this will be a new impact because, mind you, this is a new departure runway at 11,250 feet. So this is a population that's already suffered, and we're just going to make them suffer more. You know, we should be trying to alleviate that however we can.
In your charts, however, which is fine. I thank you for that clarification. You've used two tones of colors, and I see that one is for a 70 dBA LMAX. What's the other tone? What level is that?
So what chart are you speaking to, Evan?
Page 3.
Uh-huh.
You've got two tones on each of those charts. What are the two tones? One's a light blue, one's a dark blue.
One is the heavier fleet, the MD-10 contour, the light blue. Are you looking at the blue and the blue?
Yeah.
So the light blue is the heavier fleet mix, basically trying to distinguish. And then the 737-800 is the lighter fleet, the more agile aircraft. But these, Tony utilized the actual fleet mix operating at night to come up with these two. So we could just say, okay, what's the difference? The lighter fleet mix is more agile. They're getting up and out of there quicker. They're peeling off, making their turns. But when you can see this light blue growth in this contour as for the heavies, as that contour moves, as we turn it to the north, it actually grows to the south, impacting Wooddale and Bensenville. And you can see it's overlapping the 1028 arrival stream and basically departure stream area. And that just grows with heading change.
Did you analyze 295 though in this letter?
Well, 295 is represented in the chart.
Okay.
And I do have the contour below is not shown at 295. Let's see.
Okay. So at this point, everyone's had an opportunity to go through and speak. What I'd like to do is get a motion on the table with a second, and then if we need to have further discussion, we can, since I think this is our most challenging topic to date. So is there someone who'd like to make a motion on establishing departure headings for runway 27 left?
Like a motion for 275 and 295.
Is there a second? Schomburg will
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Okay, if you guys could use the raise hand feature, if you want to have discussion on this further. This is for, okay, yes, Mayor Giserny.
They're saying that 295 would affect Bensenville more, but in looking at the chart, a 290, which we approved for Alt B, or we were talking about a 290 instead of the 295 at one point in time. If we did a 290, that would certainly lessen the impact, I believe, on Bensenville and Itasca and a few others. Would we consider maybe 275 and 290? I'd like to get SOC's input on that.
Okay, Dan's got his hand up, so we'll bounce to Dan. Dan?
Yeah, I just want to point out the spillover concept, which is a good point, applies to all the quadrants, regardless of which long runway we're doing. And that's somewhat of the nature of the beast. It isn't specific just to this heading. And that's sort of the luck of the draw in geography. This northwest quadrant is less impacted by that. The southwest is more. But just speaking to the noise generated by large aircraft, and this ties in, I won't make Ryan go back to the slide, but I'll reference it. Whether you pick a 295, a 290, a 285, there's no requirement that those aircraft turn at a steeper angle to achieve those headings. You can take the same bank angle and thrust and intersect those headings without making any change to the operation of the aircraft. And that's part of what ultimately tech will go through in refining procedures to optimize these headings. None of us know exactly how they're going to operate until they're in effect. And our opinion is focus your energy on optimizing one that achieves the greatest amount of dispersion and the least overlap. And pilots understand this. They know the characteristics of their aircraft. They know they're flying at night. They're not going to put their wingtip to the ground and apply full thrust just to hit the center line of that heading, which I think the slide of the current flight tracks for Fly Quiet shows they're just incapable of doing. So I don't agree that it's a linear relationship that noise goes up with these headings. It depends on the characteristics of the aircraft, and the bulk of the fleet mix that we're discussing are the smaller aircraft, which can achieve that heading, can turn within compatible land use, and achieve that dispersion. It's a foregone conclusion that the heavies will be closer to the center line of these runways, regardless of what heading we do. But let's not forget the majority of the fleet mix can provide some dispersion. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Ron?
Yeah, just Dan actually brought up what I was going to mention is that there's a lot of focus placed on the heavies, and I can understand because they are louder than the others, but they are not the majority of the operations at night and during Fly Quiet. And we need to keep that in mind, that the majority of operations during Fly Quiet are the narrow body aircraft, and they can easily make as sharp a turn as you want. Like I said, all day long, they make 90-degree turns. Just watch Flight Track on any day at O'Hare when they're in West Flow, and you'll see them go up and down Bussy Road, basically. So there is a large, as Evan said, a large industrial complex off of these runways, and that's where the majority of the turn would be taking place, and that's where you want the noise. So just keep that in mind. And I guess I'm a little confused too as to why turning things further to the north, some of the SOC communities are hesitant, because further to the north you get, the less SOC communities you're close to. So I'm confused on that as well. But the main point is it's mostly narrow bodies at night and not heavies. There are some heavies, but it's mostly narrow bodies. So keep that in mind.
Thank you, Ron. All right, last call for discussion. Otherwise, we're going to move to a roll call vote. Okay, not seeing.
Karen, did I get a chance to respond there? I don't think I got to speak on this rotation.
Yeah, this one we were just raising hands. So if you'd like to speak, you can go ahead.
Okay. So I really want to go back to conjecture versus data-based actual analysis. We can talk about the majority of the operations at night not being heavy aircraft, but the fact is 26 of those operations at night are heavy departures, and they are the aircraft that are going to wake people up. They are the aircraft that are going to impact the 65 DNL the most. That is a well-known fact. So when we're talking heading impacts, they are the subject of interest. They are the aircraft that are going to wake your people up on the ground. And I guess I would just go back to, Ron says he's not sure why SOC doesn't like a 295 heading, and I would just, I guess, refer back to the public process that we go through. SOC meets regularly on this stuff. They have 9 mayors that sit down around a table. They look at all this data. They have the ability to engage with Dr. Tranny. They have an opportunity to look at the heavy flight tracks. And Dan, to your point, we have looked at the heavy fleet performance to the 290 heading. We've actually dissected just the heavy fleet. They are performing to that 290 heading. They are applying additional thrust. And, when you publish these fly quiet programs, these aircraft are going to try to comply. And you're coming up with a compliance program where you're going to reward aircraft for complying. So we want them to comply. We all want to achieve the goals of the program, but we want to do that in a manner that is not counteractive to our goals and these aggressive headings. And I would say in every case, off every runway in every direction, when you're employing a 25-degree heading on these 26 heavy aircraft, it's going to wake your people up, and it's going to wake new people up who have never had these heavies over their head before. And even though I'm not saying those people don't need to share in the noise, they definitely do in some reasonable manner. But I just think that the excessive headings in the long run are not the right solution. However, we have deferred to the impacted communities in every other direction. And I would, just ask the committee to respect the SOC process of the 9 communities coming together at the 275 and the 285, and respecting that in your decision going forward. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Joe?
Yes, Cynthia, during your comments, you had mentioned that there might be a problem with 295 because the FAA might not even approve it. Did you say that?
Well, I said the growth on the contour of the ground, Joe, may be a problem when the FAA evaluates the contours. When they put these 26 heavy aircraft on that 295 heading, what it's going to end up doing is bulging the contour out in that direction. When the FAA does the analysis on this, they're going to evaluate the 65 DNL in a no runway rotation scenario in comparison to a runway rotation scenario. And if the growth in that 65 DNL is excessive, it could cause problems in approving the program. That, I can't speak for the FAA, but the whole goal of a noise compatibility program is not to grow the contour. The goal is to shrink the contour.
So I'm going to stop there. I don't want to get into conjecture about what the FAA will or will not do as part of their analysis. That comes after we complete our work. We need to make our decisions based on our knowledge of our communities and the information that we learn through this process. And then the FAA will take our recommendation and do their analysis. I think trying to factor in what we think the FAA will or will not do significantly complicates things because they have a much broader scope of things they need to evaluate than we do. So, okay, we're going to start moving a little bit more quickly. Okay, sorry, Joe, do you have?
I just got to say, ultimately, this has got to be approved by the FAA. And if we spent 3.5 to 4 years trying to put this together, and then there's a possibility the FAA says no because of some reason, it concerns me. And the fact that JDA is considered an expert and I'm not, I have to at least listen to what she had to say and understand it.
Yeah,
I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, but
I just would caution that the FAA has to balance a lot of different competing interests in their analysis. And so, okay, so I've got, okay, Ron, did you put your hand back up or is it still up from the time before?
Yeah, can I just make one comment on the discussion that just took place about the FAA and their decision making? They don't necessarily make decisions based on if contours increase because you can mitigate that by doing additional sound insulation. So the FAA doesn't always make decisions just because a contour gets bigger. I mean, look, you just went through the OMP where the contour drastically changed at O'Hare, and they no problems with approving that through the EIS because additional sound insulation took place. So you can always mitigate anything that may happen if the contour changes shape or growth. So just keep that in mind. The FAA is not going to turn something down just because the contour may change or increase.
Okay, we're gonna do Evan and then Dan. Evan?
Thank you. Yeah, we're so far beyond trying to shrink the contours here. I mean, if we were trying to shrink the contours, we would limit the number of headings. We would be putting an RNAV in place. We're trying to disperse the noise. That's the objective here. We go back to that mantra we always say is we all benefit from the airport. We all need to share in its pain. So I'm not in the business of shrinking contours.
Okay, Dan?
Yeah, and thank you for your comment, Karen. We were going to sort of reiterate that. But it's worth pointing out that this 295 heading, which is a 25-degree heading change, is what the FAA provided to this committee as an acceptable heading achievable by all the aircraft. And they spent 6 months, which delayed this process, to come up with that recommendation along with others. So if these were things we should not be considering, the FAA wouldn't have provided 25 degrees or 295 as an acceptable heading. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Cynthia, last time.
We would stick with the 275 and 285 and the consensus of the SOC communities and ask that the committee respect that. As far as the FAA and shrinking contours, I think I would refer the committee to the OMP contour that I think is on the front of a lot of the noise, like quiet reporting, shrinking over time since I think back to 1997. It is, an objective nationwide through effective noise management for any airport. It's always the goal not to increase the contours. So, I mean, we can conject on that all day long, but I would refer you back to the Oncc website and the OMP contour relative to the rest of the contours. The OMP effort itself did shrink the contour, so it is an important issue, but I agree it is an FAA issue that they will work through. My comment was just that when we do our work, we're cognizant of that, and we try to always err on the side of shrinking the contour.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Gizzerni? Oh, you're muted.
I know that you're recommending a 285 heading, and others are talking about the 295 heading. Can we compromise with a 290 as I mentioned before, it seems to affect less people. And down below in the memo, it says there's little difference in population impact and reduced arrival impacts between 285, 290, and 295 headings. Could we go with the middle of 290?
Okay, Evan, is your hand new? I'm losing track. No? Okay. Cynthia, no, that's okay. Cynthia, is your hand new or is it a remnant?
It wasn't new unless Mayor Gizzerni wants me to address that, or I'm not sure.
I think it's a fair question, but Peter just put his hand up, so I'd like to get to the new members. So Peter?
Yes, I know which way I'm leaning, but I've also said we bow to the will of the impacted communities, and I don't know if we have that consensus. I don't see a consensus. I'm not sure if impacted communities, according to SOC, is different than the impacted communities or the consensus with the members of this committee. It seems like we have, I'm confused as to what the consensus would be. All I can rely on is the input from members of the Fly Quiet Committee that are impacted in those communities. So is there a way we can, when we take this vote, that we can maybe have the impacted communities vote first so that we can maybe see what the consensus is? I just at a loss for what we're talking about here with respect to impacted communities and consensus.
Aaron, you're my parliamentarian. Can we vote out of order, or do we have to go in alphabetical order?
That's an interesting question. So you are not bound to vote in a certain order.
Oh.
You have no bylaws to that effect, right? Your choice is how you vote. Is it voice vote, roll call vote, secret
Okay.
ballot, right? So
Not gonna
your
secret
bylaws
ballot.
do not get to that level of detail. So Madam Chairman, I do think you have some flexibility.
Okay.
You know, and
so-
then Karen, if you're concerned, those communities that are not impacted, simply to defer their vote. Okay, and wait till all the ones that are impacted make their vote, and then they can make their vote if you're concerned.
Okay, I think
I
what
don't
we'll
think it's a
do-
concern, but
Okay,
Madam Chairman, one option is always a motion's on the table, there is a second, and then there's a subsequent motion to table the original motion. That is also an option.
Okay, so what I think it's a valid request. I think I'm going to speak as Schaumburg for a minute. I think that SOC does a lot of work and they contribute a lot to this committee, but SOC itself is not a member of this committee. We have individual ONCC members who represent their communities and the surrounding communities who don't have the benefit of being on Fly Quiet. And so I think it's important that we keep that distinction. SOC does not speak for the entire west side of the airport, and individual communities, as Bensonville pointed out, may not be in total agreement or may learn new information today that may cause them to feel differently. So I think it's a valid request. Mayor Giserny, you had something else? Oh, you're muted, Mayor.
Just a thought on, rather than taking a vote, could the affected communities give their recommendation of 275, 295, 275, 290, 275, 280, and let's hear just their recommendation, and then that with the majority, put that to a vote.
So we kind of just did that. And I think my concern is that not all of our members are speaking up. Plus, we also have a motion on the table. So I think what I'd like to do is we're going to do a roll call vote. Maura, if you're okay with it, I'll handle it because I have my order. So you don't have to bounce around if that's okay with you. So I'm going to attempt to go in order of impacted communities. And then we will see if the motion passes or fails, and then we will discuss next steps based on that. So the motion on the table made by Bensonville was for 2 departure headings of 275 and 295 for runway 27 left. Evan, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Compromise between JDA's recommendation and the fair's recommendation.
Okay. So roll call vote. Bensonville.
Yes.
Madam Chairman, just to clarify, you have a second on that?
Yeah, Dennis was the second on that, River Grove.
Very good, thank you.
Yep. Okay, Bensonville's a yes. Wooddale.
I don't know. I'm kind of understanding what Evan says, but I have to stick with the experts. If it's going to create more noise at night, I have to vote against.
Okay. Schaumburg is a yes. Des Plaines.
Yes.
Elmhurst.
Yes.
Park Ridge.
Yes.
River Grove.
Yes.
Niles.
oh man, I'm going to say no.
Schiller Park.
Yes.
Ward 39.
Yes.
Harwood Heights.
I have to say no.
I have that the motion carries. Maura, do you concur? But Maura, you're muted.
Sorry, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you all for your really good conversation on this topic. I appreciate everyone's feedback. So with that, we are now going to move on to the discussion of secondary configurations as it relates to alternative H. So Ryan, back to you.
I was muted again. Thank you. We are moving on to secondary configurations like we did with alternative B, taking a look at the current secondary configurations that are assigned in our alternative H schedule. As a reminder, the secondary configurations are to be used when wind conditions do not allow for the primary configuration. So the secondary configuration would be the reciprocal of the primary to accommodate opposite wind conditions. And so each week has assigned primary configuration. And sorry, if everyone can mute, please, so that everyone can hear. Thank you. Each week has a primary configuration and a assigned secondary configuration to accommodate opposite wind direction. There is a direct reciprocal for each primary configuration. So if you look here at week 2, the primary configuration is configuration Q. The arrival runway is 27 center. The primary departure runway is 27 left. If the wind conditions dictate we are in east flow, we would use the exact opposite, 9 center for arrivals and 9 right for departures. And that pattern continues all the way through alternative H's schedule for the entire 16 weeks. And so this is similar to alternative B as well. When we were discussing alternative B, there was some discussion about secondary configurations in relation to consecutive impacts. And so this would be the opportunity now for this committee to discuss any concerns with the secondary configurations currently assigned in alternative H.
Thank you, Ryan. So at this point,
and I'm sorry, Madam Chair, and we have not received any comments on secondary configurations at this time. So as of right now, there are no suggestions to change the secondary configurations as currently scheduled.
okay, so I think what I'd like to do, given that we are quickly approaching 11:15, is I think I'd like to go down the list and give everyone an opportunity to share any questions or concerns or comments that they have on these secondary configurations. But I think the plan will be to take secondary configurations and long runways, and we will cover those hopefully to take final action at the December 16th meeting. But I would like to start the discussion today so that members have an opportunity to kind of start thinking about this. I know we've spent a lot of time on the departure headings, and then that way we can come prepared at our December meeting to hopefully wrap up our discussion on the alternative H modifications. So with that, we will start with Bensonville.
I know to call myself out when I'm not prepared to make a comment, and I'm not prepared to make a comment at this time. I need to do more research.
Okay, how about this? Because I will admit I am in the same boat as Bensonville. Felt like we all kind of spent all of our mental energy on that last discussion. So if there are any members who would like to speak on the secondary configurations today, please go ahead and raise your hand. We will accommodate that. Otherwise, we will just all come prepared for both secondary configurations and long runways at our next meeting. So Ernie, we will start with you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to renew the concern that I shared at least a few meetings ago. When you start populating the secondary configurations, you'll note that there is the potential for significant consecutive impact weeks. In fact, out of the 16-week rotation, it could actually occur 4 different times, 3 weeks in a row, where runway 9 right stands the potential of either being the designated long or the actual In fact, Ryan, if you would do me a favor, can you send it back to week 1 on the chart? Sorry for the number of keystrokes, Ryan.
That's okay. I forgot I had animated this. So.
You can go ahead and put the whole first 6 weeks in, but as everyone I think can see here, if you started out your rotation in week 1 in a secondary configuration, and even if it went to primary the second week, you've got potentials, especially in the secondary in that week. You got the potential for multiple weeks of consecutive impacts dealing with runway 9 right. So that's the only comment I would make, Karen. Thank you.
Thanks, Ernie. Dan?
Yeah, this is sort of where it gets very interesting. And Ernie brought up the point of consecutive impacts. And we can certainly see those in some of the weeks where there's 2 consecutive. And what I'd like to just offer the committee is a comparison to the longest rotation experience we have, which is IFQ. And I think some of the intention behind primary configurations is that we can prioritize them, or at least follow the schedule. And what's interesting that happened in IFQ, where there was almost 80% of the operations in West Flow, that in West Flow, the primary configuration constituted about 4 out of every 5 operations. In East Flow, it was only 1 in 4. So there's an asymmetrical relationship between East and West Flow as to how you prioritize these configurations. And that's what really carries a significant risk to both airfields, but more so the South Airfield, which Alternative H prefers in West Flow. And it really doesn't matter. I know we had 2 options on how to organize these weeks. You can flip these around, turn them upside down, and you're still going to have a high probability of 3 consecutive weeks. 2 that you see here, but you also have to pick the next consecutive one out of the secondary. And this just really goes back to some of the structural issues with H. We're not aware of a way to fix this. We will certainly look at it, because what I can't tell you about how residents will respond to a rotation, whether it'll be arrivals, departures, altitude, noise from turns, because those vary from resident to resident. Well, I can tell you they will hold everyone accountable to as consecutive impacts. And those really need to be avoided at all costs, or we'll all be accountable for the next 40 years. Why does the schedule say this week I had noise previous week? Why do I have it this week? Why do I have it the following week? So I guess the ask is to really focus and put everybody's brain cells together and see if there's a way to solve this. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Alderman Dunn?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. So I think the committee has already discussed and agreed to the primary configuration pattern. And my thought is that the secondary configurations are mirror images to that, and they're coupled together. So I don't know that there's a lot we can do if we've already settled on the primary. The secondary, that top row, if we settled on that, then that bottom row is just going to be a default. So that's my comments.
Okay, thank you. Cynthia, did you have something? Oh, you're muted.
So I just want to remind everybody the consecutive impacts on that Ernie was alluding to on the out long runway was a result of the concession to eliminate the consecutive impacts on the diagonals when we changed the order of that. So it is something that we've already manipulated in the previous discussions, and that's the outcome of it. And like Dan said, it's a difficult objective when you're talking, the alt longs really play havoc with that consecutive impact rule because they absolutely have to be employed when the diagonals are employed. And this seemed to be at the time the least consecutive impacts that we could come up with reordering the weeks of the order of the schedule.
Okay. I don't see any other hands, so I think Dan made an excellent point that if everybody could just take a little time, review the secondary configurations as well as the long runways. Any feedback you can provide to Landerman Brown and myself between now and our meeting on December 16th will help us advance these discussions at our next meeting so that we can keep this process moving. So please reach out, set up meetings, share any information that you might be looking for or any suggestions you might have to improve secondary configurations or establish departure headings for the long runways. With that, our next meeting is December 16th at 9:30 a.m. via Zoom again. So please make sure that is on your calendar. We will move to comments from the audience. So if you are a member of the audience and you'd like to speak, please do so now. Okay. Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Oh, wait, Suzanne, wait, hold on. Sorry, I didn't see Suzanne's hand. I apologize.
That's okay. I was just trying to find the button on the screen. I just would like to say, I think this has been a good conversation, but as a citizen, I get confused because it seems like we keep changing the criteria of fly quiet, and I understand particular areas, very concerned about their areas because that's how it should be. But it seems like we're setting aside predictability and equity and saying NIMBY all the time. I'm in a highly populated area. I'm over 2 long runways, and I would submit that in Chicago we've got a very heavy populated group of neighborhoods that are affected with things with arrivals. And, Cynthia, you brought up a point that you had some new information in your letter. I wasn't sure what that was or where your population numbers came from, if that was from a prior census. I'd be curious to hear that. And, you mentioned that there was like 57% more dispersion. One thing that I didn't hear in this conversation about night and fly night is, we talk about the heavies. Is that the majority of the cargo planes? Because when I don't sleep at night, I hear constant planes and I'm assuming they're cargo. I don't think they're heavies. They're probably the regulars. But when we talk about predictability and equity, I'm getting hammered in both ways, as everyone is. And it just seems that we're not thinking of the big view. We're looking at, our little fiefdoms, everyone. So that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Dennis, did you want to make a motion? Oh, wait, Mayor Giserni.
As we're going to be looking at this, could Ryan send us, so I have a clean copy of alternate H weeks 1 through 16?
Sure, we can make sure you get that.
Great, thank you.
Now I'm going to make my motion. I move we adjourn.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
And I'm going on a cruise in a few hours, so. Bon
Again?
voyage.
All right, we got a roll call first, so
Okay.
don't hang up yet.
Bensonville,
Yes.
Dave Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Niles,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
Yes.
River Grove,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Schiller Park,
Yes.
and Wooddale.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.
Okay. Dennis, enjoy your cruise. Everybody have a good
Thank you.
Thanksgiving. We'll talk to you all
Happy
soon.
Thanksgiving.
Happy
Bye.
Thanksgiving,
Bye.
everyone.